All right, guys, so for this watercolor, it is going to be more of kind of the style that I paint in. So grab your supplies, and if you have more simplified supplies, just use the closest color that you have to what I'll be using on the screen, because we are going to use some unexpected colors today. All right, and make sure you take your progress photos. And once you have your traceable transferred to the surface, we're going to jump right into our light burnt sienna. And when I say light burnt sienna, that means it's a good amount of water with a little bit of your pigment. And, you know, your shade may be a little lighter or darker than mine. That's okay. Now, as you go along today, I want you to just observe where I place each of these colors and mimic that to the best of your ability. Trust your instincts, especially as you're working with watercolors. And if you need to deviate a little bit or inclined to deviate from what I'm doing, go right ahead and do that. So when you're working with watercolor, the first time you grab the pigment and the first place you put it on your paper is going to be your darkest, your highest saturation. And you can always add water to it, like you saw that I did at the top. And again, as you go through this, you're just strengthening your power of observation and mimicking what you see. And that's actually one of the biggest things about art, is strengthening your observation and looking at what you see. So we're just starting off from the get-go with that. So as you've kind of watched a little bit, you can see that I'm not really grabbing pigment, but I am using the residual pigment that's on my brush to kind of soften anything, make it a little bit lighter as I go into other areas. This will become a little bit more comfortable and natural the more that you paint and the more that you play with watercolors. And I say play because watercolors, you kind of have to learn to control and not control the water. So we have what we call happy accidents in the world of art, but especially in the world of watercolors. So if you do happen to have a happy accident or something goes where you don't want it to, embrace it and make it part of your painting. All right, so as we move into the next color, we're going to be moving into purple. And like I said, for my usual style, I use very unexpected colors. So that's what this one is today. And we're going to be using purple in our shadow area. Again, just looking at where I place it, the general mark, where I overlap, and just kind of make it your own. And here you can see that a lot of times I do just kind of touch the tip of the brush to the paper, then pull it back. This is kind of like a pointillism style, and it's a nice way to just transfer a little bit of pigment, and then you can kind of go back and manipulate it. Now, as you're doing this, do not hold your breath. So take a big inhale for me and just relax. I'm really proud of you for painting at home, and especially watercolors that can be kind of intimidating. Just have fun. You are 5 years old right now, just playing with paint. And hopefully while you are playing, the rest of the world just kind of ceases to exist for a little bit, and you get to focus on this sheet in front of you and video in front of you. All right, so getting our kind of first shadow on, and with this style of watercolors for me, I consider these my sketches, and I just kind of play with a few layers. We'll do a darker outline and then a few more colors on top of that. And feel free to kind of take this formula and do that on your own as far as things that you want to paint. Do kind of like a base color of what you want it to be, do an outline to define it, and then go back in and add more intensity, more colors. All right, so as this, you can see I kind of placed the purple where I wanted it, and that was the darkest. And if you need to, you can wipe your brush off and then go back, and with just a slightly moist brush, you can soften the edges, you can blend it a little bit into the paper. Some of the residual paint that you'll have on your brush, you can go in for where you want the light shades of purple. And the most important thing with watercolor painting is just don't overthink it too much. Just have fun. And like I said earlier, just embrace any unexpected accidents, happy accidents that might happen. So again, there, as we were working in with the green, you can see where I first placed the pigment, the darkest, and I wanted that darkest right underneath the squirrel, so it was kind of creating a shadow, and then just kind of pulled that color towards the bottom of the paper. And if you feel like switching out colors, go right ahead and do that. All right, so now I think I did let the paper dry a little bit, and as you work with watercolors, you'll see the difference between really wet paper and really dry paper, and you'll kind of find your preference. So again, explore both options. Here we're using that raw sienna, and it kind of warms it up since that burnt sienna and purple were kind of on the cool side. And we're putting these in the general area where a lot of the highlights would be. And like I said a moment ago, is warming it up with that yellow. And kind of interesting to see where that yellow overlaps the burnt sienna and kind of the new color it creates. As you're working with your watercolors and overlapping colors, you are observing how colors play together. And you'll start, the more that you do this, you'll find your colors that you enjoy working with more than others. So just start taking note of that. So again, let your paper dry, and then you'll move into, I'm using an India ink brush pen, and there's a link in the description box below to where you can acquire those. If you don't have one of these, you can use a pointy brush and black watercolor paint or black acrylic paint. If you're using the black watercolor paint, just remember that the more that you make your brush strokes, the lighter the color is going to get. So just keep reloading your brush with the black watercolor paint and not use as much water. And as you're doing this, I believe I keep the picture in the same orientation here just because I'm filming, but if you need to turn it sideways, turn it upside down to be able to make some of these lines a little bit easier, go right ahead and do that. You can also, at the end of this outline, pause the video so that way you can see where all the outlines that I added are, and just use that as a guide. I would say probably the most important one to get kind of close, oh good, I did change the direction for this, is the eyeballs. Make sure you kind of focus on where that catch light is, leaving the white of the paper. If you end up not leaving the white of the paper, you could use acrylic white paint and place it on top. But the catch light, that white space in the black eyeball, is important. That's what kind of gives life to our little squirrel. So as you're playing with the brush pen or the brush, play with your pressure. Light pressure is going to keep a lighter line. More pressure is going to be a wider or fatter line. If you have a variety of widths of line in your painting, perfectly okay. Each time you do this, you'll have a little different pressure and a little bit of a different comfort level while you're painting. All right, so I did let the paper dry and take your progress picture. We're moving into kind of an earthy pink. So I added water with some red, and then there was a little bit of burnt sienna in there, so it kind of warms it up and kind of brings it back to the first color that we were using. Again, remember the first place that you put your brush, that is going to be your darkest, your highest saturation for watercolor, and then it diffuses as you make your marks from there. Again, as we're working on the tail feathers, keeping that light pressure, I am overlapping some of the other colors, overlapping a few of those marks from the black pen as well. And as always, trust your instincts if you need to place it somewhere I do not on your painting. All right, and then moving back into the body of our squirrel, it is just nice to kind of lay these colors, and they are still transparent. So what is underneath this color does affect the color you put on top of it. And as I'm working into the face, again, just kind of using little dots, just touching the tip of the brush to the canvas to kind of create these shapes and spaces. As you get more and more into this process, maybe let it dry, and then prop your painting up and look at it from a distance of 5 to 10 feet away. And this is the normal viewing distance for artwork and pretty much generally everything in life. So learning to look at your work from that perspective and going to make changes as needed will help your progress as an artist. All right, moving back to the raw sienna. Again, just going a little bit more opaque with the coverage, so a little bit less water and more pigment. And again, remember to breathe. You're doing great. And if you do want to see my style artwork, these watercolors are for sale. I've got a pretty good collection going, but there is a link in the description box below. And if you need to rotate the watercolor paper because it's easier to move your hand in a certain direction for the tail fur, feel free to rotate your paper as needed. All right, going back to the purple, going to intensify our shadows. And here, as I work on this one, you'll notice where I put the really dark purple kind of on his chest in between his hands. And you'll notice as I continue to do this, I go back to that pile and pick up some of that pigment with my brush and then go to another area. This is just kind of something that I've kind of do as I work with the watercolor because I didn't quite want it that dark, but it was a nice place to just kind of leave some pigment. So as you develop your watercolor style, you'll find your own kind of tricks and ways to adjust if you put too much pigment somewhere, if you need to take something off. And that's why creative outlets just get better with more practice. It's not about being perfect, but it's about just escaping your world for a little bit, transforming a white surface or something into nothing, and escaping and just doing you for a little bit. And I think we need more and more of that in this world. All right, so I am using what we call a rigger brush or a liner brush. The bristles are about 3 inches long. You can use your regular pointy brush. And again, this one works with pressure. So if you're using the pointy brush or the rigger brush, light pressure and using just the tip of the brush. And same thing here that I was talking about with the purple. I was going in with pretty saturated pigment, placing it, and then kind of clean that brush off and going back to that pigment and diffusing it into the paper and kind of away from the initial placement. So as you're moving into this, if you are a first-time painter, just take it slowly and be kind to yourself. If you're starting to get more and more comfortable with the process of painting, this is going to work on your brush control and your dexterity and pressure while you're working with the pigment and these fine lines. So wherever you are at, I am very proud of you, and just embrace what you are learning right now. You can paint this multiple times and you will learn something different each time. So here I'm using actually white ink, and you can use white gouache, white watercolor ink or pigment. You can also use white acrylic paint. Now with the ink that I'm using, it's not super opaque, so it does kind of lighten as it dries, so it's not a pure white pigment. If you need pure white pigment, acrylic paint or gouache work really well on top of watercolor. And again, we're putting the highlights on there, and just kind of observe the place where I put it, and more importantly, trust your instincts on where to place a highlight. The highlight is kind of where the light, the sun or the light source hits the object first. So that's usually the brightest part. And because it's the highlight, that's what pops forward when we're viewing it. All right, you guys, great job. Thanks so much for hanging out while I did one of my painted sketches, and I look forward to what you guys create with yours. Until next time, cheers.